Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Steve Cuss. On this podcast, we take a look at things like triggers, reactivity, coping mechanisms, these things that bubble under the surface of our lives that get in the way of our well-being with ourselves, but also our well-being with our people and our well-being with our connection to God. It turns out that reactivity and triggers tend to disconnect us and we end up not being well. And so on this show, we teach you how to notice and name and then diffuse those triggers so you can be deeply connected. Every episode, we light a candle because it's so easy to forget the Lord. We operate at such a fast pace. We have so much coming at us. So every episode, we just pause and we light a candle so that we can relax into God's presence. Take a deeper than normal breath. And sometimes we use this time just to exchange with God. We think about the things that we're carrying that God has invited us to trust God with, and also just exchange God's burden for our burden. Today, I'm really excited to have Charlie Peacock on the show. Charlie, for me, has been a hero of mine in so many ways for about 30 years now. I've always had a deep love for music. I play music myself. I play guitar and I kind of play at stringed instruments. Guitar is my main instrument, but I play a few different stringed instruments. But the truth is, I'm not a natural musician. I deeply love music. It does not come naturally to me. I have to work at it. And I've always admired people for whom music, it just pours out of them like a talent. And I've followed Charlie Peacock's musical career since the 90s, really since just a few years after I became a follower of Jesus. It got really personal for me because when I changed countries and came to America for Bible college, I didn't know anybody and I was really homesick. And I packed 2 suitcases to change countries. One suitcase was full of clothes and towels and bedding, and one suitcase was full of books and CDs. And my music became just such a companion to me in those homesick times. And Charlie's music was one that I would just listen to over and over again. If you're not familiar with Charlie Peacock, he's a fascinating guy on a number of levels. His musicianship is through the roof. He's an unbelievably talented musician, but also his intellect and his way with words. We get into it in the podcast. The way Charlie chooses words and puts them together is both playful and provocative, and it's profound. But also, Charlie is equally renowned behind the mixing desk, not just as an artist. He's also one of the world's finest producers. Charlie's won 6 Grammy Awards for his music and his production. He's highly sought after because of his taste, because of his sense of tones and rhythm, but also, and we get into this in the show, because of his ability to relax an artist to get their best performance. This was the part of the episode for me I was most intrigued by, the way Charlie as a producer can feel the anxiety in the room and the intuitive things he knows how to do to relax an artist so that they can give their full performance. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Charlie, not just as a podcast guest, but as a friend. He and his wife, Andy, are remarkable people. In fact, you can tune in to last year's episode when he and Andy joined me on the pod. I'm so excited to share him with you. I know for many of you, he's an old, faithful friend, but for some, this may be the first time getting to know Charlie Peacock. Charlie, I've been looking forward to chatting with you since the last time you and your wife, Andy, came on the show. Thank you so much for coming back on Being Human.
Of course. Well, I've been looking forward to this too. Andy and I had such a good time with you, Steve. Thank you for being such a gracious host to us.
Yeah, I just find you to be eminently a fascinating human on so many levels. Like just the quality of your musicianship is unbelievable. But then if we put you on the other side of the mixing desk as a producer, we just see the range and the tones and the rhythms. We could spend the whole time talking about your songwriting and the way you play with words and images. One of my favorite songs of yours has the phrase "burnt toast" and repetition, which
Yes.
is
Yes.
an amazing conjugation, but also your business acumen and your relationships. It's all captured in your latest book, which is really a memoir called Roots and Rhythm. Let's just get into that first and we'll see where we go. There's so many ways we can go, Charlie, but tell us about this incredible book.
This book was 15 years in the making. Um, the only thing I knew when I started writing it was that I was exploring the power of place in the development of people, but specifically an artist. Um, and it was a time when we were living in Nashville, as we still do, but we bought a house in California in our hometown so that we could fly out there, every month or couple of months and spend 2 weeks or so in our hometown with our people. So we may have said this in our last interview, but where we grew up, I think we always perceived it as a place you leave. And so as later on as an adult, I wanted to go back and experience it as a place you stay and to see it with new eyes and to see my people there with new eyes and new ears. And so that's where the writing first began. And a lot of that material didn't make it into the book. It is, as I've often said about, writing songs that people never hear, is they're the stones you step on to get across the river, right? And so there was a lot of writing that was just me experimenting. I think both Andy and I told you that we write as epistemologists. We write to know what we know, and writing just happens to be a good way that helps our brains do that. And then the second thing that for me was I wanted to write the way uh, my as a model of my experience as a jazz musician. And so I wanted to write where every single thing, every word, every incident and accident was all fully and seamlessly integrated into this interconnectedness, right, of non-neutrality. So that was a big driving idea, right at the beginning of it. And then, of course, out of that poured a lot of different things. And in fact, my son asked me last night, how much of the stories that you told were planned? And I said, more of it was as I'm explaining, it was more theological or philosophical in the beginning in terms of how I might write or how I might discover how I know what I know or how I become the artist I become. And then once, just like with songwriting, once I made a first choice, then that first choice might trigger something like an illustration. Like he was asking me, like, how did you get the Humphrey the whale? Which I don't know if any of your listeners would remember this, but it was a whale that got lost in the Bay Area, right? And I said, well, I had read this article. I've been talking about John Sutter, and I read this article about people celebrating the return of Humphrey the whale to the San Francisco Bay. And they were standing over this causeway, cheering and drinking, Sutter Home Chardonnay or something, right? Toasting one another. And I realized, wow, the gold rush drove John Sutter out of, because there's a whole thing about reversals of fortune in the book too, which is sort of a take on Homer's Odyssey. And so I saw, like, oh my gosh, Sutter really got lost in his pursuit of name making and wealth, right? And and right in the same place, this whale gets lost, right? It gets like a parasite in its brain, in the same way that we we get parasites in our brains that, you know, just cause us to lose good sense completely, or sense of direction. And so once I had that, it's like the skies opened up, and then I could go anywhere from there. And that's so much like it is for me with art making is that years ago, I put this in the book to another record producer I um, that produced me and mentored me very early on. He would always tell me, he's like, "We just need one big idea. That's all we need. We just need one big idea." And for the longest time, I would be confused by that because I didn't really understand that what he was talking about is, land is a big idea. Dirt is a big idea, right? You mix dirt and water and seed, right? And time, and pretty soon you've got food, and then you've got energy, right? Which helps you to come up with and your next idea. And yeah, so that's really the way the book started. It started with these big ideas and then the idea became like, okay, wherever it leads me, I'm going to go. Like, I'm not going to have the voice of a book editor sort of speaking over my shoulder, say, "Stay in your lane, stay in your lane. Too many rabbit holes." My thing was like, "Hey, I'm an artist. I'm a jazz musician. I'm going to go down the rabbit hole. I'm going to take you with me, and then I'm going to show you like what we learned there, how it's connected to what's on the surface of the earth." So hopefully I executed that. We'll see.
That's what I so enjoyed about reading it. I had the privilege of an early copy of the book, and it was a fun ride, Charlie, by which I say there was a lot of pain in there as well. I don't mean to say it by fun, I don't mean flippant, but it was like reading I love the way you just described it, like a jazz musician who bounces one idea off the next and you just get to go with them. But Charlie, in contrast to that, if that's what your memoir is, if we could then swing the pendulum wildly over to a finely crafted song with tight lyrics, what that makes me think of is Apollo 13, the movie where there's unconstrained creativity. In some ways, that's the book. You get unconstrained, you get to chase. But then in Apollo 13, there's that infamous or famous moment where Tom Hanks is stuck in space and Gary Sinise calls the team. And he basically says, we need to put this square filter in this round pipe. And then he dumps what they have up on the capsule. This is all we have to fix it. And I see that scene and I think that's constrained creativity. It's still very creative, but you have limits. This is a very long winded question, but your songwriting reminds me of Paul Simon. Even in your last answer, you used a Paul Simon phrase, incidents and accidents, which his next line is hints and allegations. Um, you have so many lines in your songs that have that same quality. There goes singing John without his helmet on. Uh, I would love to hear what that is, because that is part of your distinctive, I think, is that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's in the nature and nurture column. My mother was she was the word wrangler. My father was a vocab guy. Like he kept trying to always boost your vocabulary. Mom wasn't so much that as she was more like in the rhyming and the limerick I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would say if I came home from school in seventh grade, right, and my mom wasn't there in the afternoon, and there on the counter there would be a limerick, which would instruct me what was supposed to happen when I arrived, after school. And of course, it would be something like, doing your homework, cleaning your room, vacuuming the pool, visiting a friend, calling your grandmother and empty the dishwasher. So it might be something like that, but it would be all told to me in this artful way with these uh, rhymes. And so I think I got used to that idea that there was that you could come up with these clever couplets, a way to put together language that would say something very potent in a small little piece. And then the other thing is that I was raised, on on my mother's side. She was the first college educated person, so her take was, a little bit more sophisticated. But my grandfather was brilliant at. He came from Texas and to Oklahoma, and he was brilliant at just coming up with that one phrase, all right, that had such musicality to it and such pitch. Like if he were to say, "Oh, I don't know about that," and it does da 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 da, right? And it just had a pulse to it, had a rhythm to it, musicality to it. And his language was so much like that and had so much dynamics to it. And I think I tell the story in the book about my dad, like a conversation between him and my dad, right? And the way that my grandpa would win an argument is first he would raise his voice, right? So he would make his declarative statement about reality, right? Which my dad would kind of call BS on, right? And then and then my grandpa would push back into his chair and pick up his spit can, spit some tobacco into it, and then just give one very succinct one liner, but quiet, sort of under his breath, right? So he went from this hyper dynamics of, music wise, triple forte, right, down to pianissimo, and right. And I just learned that like there was a way of speaking and constructing language that one, it was about the words, it was about their rhythmic flow, and inner rhymes, and then just the dynamics of them. And I think that was really the start of it. And then the beats, and by the beats, for the listeners who maybe the shorthand doesn't work, I mean, I'm talking about people that I grew up reading, which would be like Michael McClure and Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and Gary Snyder. And so that whole beat literature movement was a lot about extemporaneous writing. And Jack Kerouac was famous for writing his book on the road as one just long sheet of paper, right? He got this kind of butcher paper that he put into his typewriter and just extemporaneously write these long, what were basically like a jazz performance of language. And so just with those influences, I think, and again, like you mentioned, the artistry of someone like Paul Simon. Um, but even with Paul, who's a different generation than me, I think we're drawing on a lot of the same kinds of influences. His being more East Coast, and mine being more first generation West Coast, through filtered through the South. And then, because that's what I see. You've got No Man's Land in the back there, and so that's what you hear me doing on No Man's Land. Is you hear me using that same sort of developed technique that someone like Paul Simon would have, but I'm filtering it through the language of my grandparents.
Right. Like an album, like Everything That's on My Mind, is like a celebration of, well, American rock music, I suppose. And No Man's Land is like a celebration of, what would you call it, Charlie? Americana or Southern roots, or
Yeah, it's Southern roots music,
almost
Americana.
a Zydeco at times?
Yeah, exactly. Like my grandfather was born, you know, in the Lake Charles area, which is the home of Zydeco. Um, and I there's no recordings of my great grandfather or Uncle Tommy, who were musicians, played fiddle and like resonator guitar and whatnot. But so I don't know like how much they leaned into, like were they just playing simple folk fiddle songs, that are part of the American tradition, or were they leaning into the Zydeco type thing as well? I have no idea. There's no way for me to know that.
Hmm. In Roots and Rhythm, uh, uh, you let us come on your journey of starting your public work when you first start playing Sacramento area, and then we move with you to Nashville when you pick up more of your producer work as well as your performance work. It's always fascinating to me, Charlie, when somebody first discovers that they're good at something, to make a go of it. Was that gradual for you, or was that a moment for you when you said, "Okay, I'm good enough. I can keep going down this path"?
Well, do you recall the poem at the end of the book? There's a poem that's in the style of, I mean, it's obviously through who I am as an artist today, but I would have been writing poems like that when I was in my late teens and early 20s. And so I wanted to be I wanted to be a poet, right? So probably, I mean, in the hierarchy of things you can tell your parents that you want to be, if you told them, well, I want to grow up to be a musician, be like, I don't know about that. But if you say, I want to grow up to be a poet, I mean, they literally break down in tears, because it's like, and that's where I was at as a teenager, about to get married. Was like, I seriously, I was such a huge fan of writers, and I Gary Snyder, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Turtle Island for poetry in 1975, um, the year that we got married, lived like 40 miles up the road from us. So there, it seemed real. It seemed like, well, of course I could be a poet. You know, um, in the same way with the music was always happening at the same time, but I just kind of got fascinated with that for a time. Uh, but I'll say this, Steve, there was always someone coming around. There was always an adult entering into the story somewhere who created a circle of affirmation and affirmed me and allowed me to spin up to the next circle where there would be someone else waiting to affirm me. And I begin to recognize those, and they begin to fuel my confidence. So, whatever doubt I had, or insecurities, or imposter syndrome, or any of that, um, it was combined with my own ego and confidence, but also the confidence that, well, there are people that are saying, "Hey, you're really good at this," and I would listen to them and take it in and say, "Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. Like if your community is giving you their blessing, then you should listen to that."
It's actually one of the themes of the book that I was not expecting, that I absolutely loved. Um, you name so many people in this book. There must be over 1,000 names, most of them in the music industry, most of the musicians, I didn't go back and tally it up, Charlie, but my subjective thought would be probably a few hundred of them are world famous. Someone like a Bono or a Jackson Brown, people that you have worked with and you know. But the majority of them probably not known as publicly. But the distinctive of the book was two thoughts. It was the way people open doors for you every step of the way. You were you made a real point to show that you stand on the shoulders and then you open doors for others. And just the wildly relational nature of art, that your art is highly connected to relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so much so. I mean, there's a lot of people that I may still be connected to today and, have a conversation with now and again, either through email or social media. But there's a part of their story that connects with mine that will always be important to both of us and will always travel. Like I mentioned a bass player named Daniel Barth, and who was a real character. And but just as an example, one of the things that he did, he was a senior in high school when I was a freshman, and he, got permission from my parents to take me uh, down to Oakland in the Bay Area. And so when I was still a teenager, that's when I began to see, people like Al Green and Ray Charles and Ike and Tina Turner, see them live, or see Stan Getz, with a young Chick Corea and, playing piano with him. And that just opened up a world. I just feel like anyone who opens the world up to you like that, you owe a debt, of thanks to them, right? Because especially for artists, like when you see it done, I mean, that experiential learning part and the visceral part of it amplifies the stages of learning, and it expediates them, moves them along the track so much faster. Like if you're 17 years old and you're sitting at home in your bedroom listening to records, at that time, which I was doing, that's one thing, and that's important. But when you go sit at the feet of the greats, like the legends, then like that's a master class, right? And you, for the whole next year, you're going to be thinking about that and pondering and having these epiphany moments of where you realize what something was. And then when you begin to realize, oh, they're doing the thing that riff from the Rolling Stones is actually theirs, and you start to put all these connections together. And in many ways, that's one of the ways that you become a record producer, is that you see and hear all of this interconnected music until it's really truly one music.
My daughter Kaylee has gotten me into Billie Eilish, and I think through Billie Eilish, I have really gotten into her brother Phineas, who, of course, is really the genius behind the music production. And I think, obviously my daughter relates to Billie's lyrics, fellow teen kind of deal. But for me, it's the tones and the textures that just really come alive to me in her music. I love the production choices, and and that's what I think of with you too, Charlie, whether it's your own music that you're the performer or whether you're behind the mixing desk producing. It seems to me that you pay such particular attention to tones and textures and rhythms. We've covered like the lyrical side with songwriting, but I'd love to just get your riff on tone and texture. There's something, what is it about it that makes the heart sing or draws us to each other? There's something about it.
Yeah. Well, everything is about creating contrast. And so you have many options for how you're going to create that contrast. But, creating contrast could be through texture, it could be through intonation. Like, for example, right now in production, it's very common to introduce an out of tune sound into the track, which never we would have never done, in the 80s and 90s or anything like that. We would have been spending all our time making sure everything was in tune. But that's an interesting idea, right? It's like the whole tune is the whole track is in tune. All the other choices are in tune. And then there's this one wobbly keyboard part that's like, that's not really in tune, is it? No, it's not, but it's cool. And what does it do immediately is it has created the contrast. And that contrast is what moves you into the music again. Because when you're listening to music, you're not keeping track of it, like in the same way that you're not keeping track of like how you're riding a bike when you're riding it, but you're actually engaging and disengaging, right? You're moving closer, you're coming back, but parts of you're interacting with your physical body, you're interacting with your intellect, you get distracted for a minute, your imagination goes off some other place. And so what really great music production does, and I would put performance in that, not just what a producer or the musicians are doing, but the actual artist performance, is that it woos you, and it's just one um, big invitation. And even there's certain kinds of music that spend the first 3.5 minutes of a song repelling you, just challenging you to stay in the room, right? To get to the punchline. And then if you stay in the room with it, right? And 3.5 minutes into it, when the scene change happens and you feel that scene change, then as far as you're concerned, it's the greatest song in the world. But you had to stay in the room, right? For the full 4.5 minutes or 5 minutes. Well, what happens with music production is some people aren't willing to risk that. And particularly from a commercial standpoint, that's why you have formulaic songs in the same way that you have formulaic movies and literature and everything. It's all sort of based on the, beat kind of screenwriting theory, of creating tension and release. But music does that pretty naturally. But I would say that we musicians and producers and performers, we do that. We tease that out both explicitly and implicitly. We do it but we very much do it at the tacit level. So it's like once you've put in your time, and particularly in my generation, we were, I think, particularly good at it because we played live music first. So you had to put your time in playing live music. So before you got to be a recording artist. Today, you can be a recording artist. You just have to wake up one morning and go, "Hey, I'm going to download Logic onto my, iPad or my laptop," and then you can be a recording artist. But in our generation, you had to learn to be a musician first. You had to play live. People had to affirm you as you played live, and you made enough noise that somebody who controlled the recording industry paid attention to you, and then you had this incredible opportunity, to record. So now that that's all democratized, it's a different system. But I will say, playing in front of audiences, right, and listening and watching was a huge teacher that set me up, I think, to succeed in the studio. Because I could say when I wanted the track, right, which, we're not recording live down the street at some nightclub, right? We're in what some people might consider to be a sterile sort of environment, right? And particularly for an artist, if they're young and it's the first time they're in the studio and you're saying, like, give me the best performance of your life. Well, it might be kind of difficult. There's a lot of tricks and things that we do to try to set them up to succeed in that environment. But what I'm able to do, because I have played live so much, is that I'm able to create those kind of live moments mixed with the polish of the studio, right? While paying attention to the live performance of the vocal, because that's when it's going to be most forward in the mix if it's vocal music. And I think that just gives you, any musician who's played live, I think you've just got a leg up on the production thing because you've looked people in the eyes, or you've made them dance, or you've made them cry, or you've seen their response. They've come up to you afterwards, and so you have a much bigger, almost more humane view of the whole interaction, between performer and audience, and that you can now then go and say, I remember that. Okay. Don't forget that. Let's make sure that this music has that feeling that we felt. And I've literally done that. I've literally said, thought of a circumstance where I was experiencing live music and then said, okay, what will it take to extrapolate outward from that into this track that I'm working on right now?
There's a song by Patty Griffin that it melts me. It's the rowing song. I
Mm.
don't know what the lyrics are. I've probably listened to the song hundreds of times, but I couldn't recount the lyric. But once she's done singing, the French horn takes over. And it just does something in my body that she kind of steps away. And I marvel at the producer who said, this song needs French horn. That's the next move. And you have a series on YouTube. It's fairly obscure. It's definitely for those of us who are more music nerds. I think it's called Behind the Desk, if I'm remembering right, Charlie, where you kind of show us a track
Oh,
that
open up a track and kind of get under the hood. Yeah.
Yep. And for a music nerd like me, it's crack cocaine. I love
Yeah.
it because I can't do it, but I appreciate it. But there's a Civil Wars track that you deconstruct and you just kind of quieten the vocal and you bring up Gabe Scott's Hammer Dulcimer. And the only reason I know Hammer Dulcimer is because Rich Mullins. I'm a big fan of Rich Mullins' music. That's how I learned about the Hammer Dulcimer. But I sat there watching that video thinking, what in the world happened where Charlie is saying to himself, oh, this is where a hammer dulcimer would go nice? Because as you bring it up, something happened in my body. It was quite a visceral
Yeah,
reaction. It just worked.
exactly.
What
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
that?
It's a
That's
great,
incredible.
yeah. Well, yeah, the hammer dulcimer is such a, I mean, it's a wonderful instrument on its own, but in terms of an instrument that you're overdubbing, and for the audience, that means basically recording it after you've recorded the main performance. Um, it functions as a piano. It's a similar thing. In other words, the only difference is that the performer is playing the little mallets, right, on these very short kind of piano-y strings, right? Some hybrid between guitar and piano string, and so it's got a pingy ring to it, almost like a old timey sort of piano, if people can imagine that. But it has a clarity to it like bells. So it hints at a number of different things while remaining its own unique thing. And I love it too. The other thing about it is it creates a lot of kind of ambient uh, post attack sound, right? And that sound just swims. It just kind of rings and swims behind the original attack. So if you were to play, bing, bing, ding, and three notes, well, that bing, 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 they all are kind of going to run together a bit, right, into their own sort of special sauce, which is another one of the great things about it, because in particular with the example that you gave with the Civil Wars, well, my job was to capture the greatest performance of them that I could possible, like based on that simple interpretation of two voices and guitar and occasionally piano, like on Poison and Wine. And then anything that we overdubbed had to support that and not detract from it. We were really like Ad Reinhardt or something. It was minimalism. I mean, that would be the fine arts equivalent of it. It was minimalism. And so we would find that we would almost like, lift the paintbrush onto the canvas and touch the canvas and go, no, not that. Not that. That doesn't work. The music would constantly tell us what would work and wouldn't work. And when we tried the dulcimer, it was, the music said, oh, I like that. I like that. That belongs there. So I suppose there is, the art of recognizing when it's complementary, and it needs to live there. It needs to reside in the song.
Yeah, I think you're helping us understand that a proper artist is highly sensitive, an HSP, right? A highly sensitive person. You know that if minimalism is the goal with this track, you've overpainted with one instrument and dulcimer works. And what I'd like to do now, Charlie, is just pivot us to the second part of the show, where we really focus on our interpersonal dynamics and our relationships. And I'm enrolled in a doctorate. Actually, since we probably last met, I've started my doctorate, and what I'm wanting to focus on is I want to teach people how to notice when somebody has gone into self-protection in your presence. They can no longer be fully themselves. They kind of have to be guarded. Or if they've swung the other way and they've gone into pretense, let me give you a very manufactured, curated image of myself. It strikes me that that same sensitivity that you have the tones and textures and lyrics, you really bring to people. What are a couple of your secrets in the studio? There's a lot of pressure for somebody to give a good performance. You must be hyper aware. I don't know how you would word it, whether they're going to pretense or protection or something, but you must be hyper aware to help them stay human sized so they can bring a good performance. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah. I think probably the way I entered into this whole domain that you're working in right now was more using the words fear and freedom. And so I became very sensitive to the presence of fear in the studio, like when it would enter the room, and who would bring it, and then it became like, what can I do to help this person let go of this fear, or address it, actually verbalize and talk about it. Is there a problem that needs to be solved? Because so much of creativity is using the imagination to solve problems. And record production is, in many ways, it's 10% capturing amazing performances and 90% solving problems. And so it's imagining a series of possible answers to those problems and then moving through it. And of course, you have to do that with people too. So, um, yeah, that was the first my first introduction is like, wow, I can't get what I want from this person because they maybe they won't risk, right? Like fear is holding them back. They're actually afraid of failing in front of other people. So I did find that I spent a lot of time, the first part of my career, a lot of time helping people uh, believe that whether we have a long time relationship or, hey, I just met you yesterday, that I am a trustworthy agent and that you can trust me that I will hold um, what happens here as sacred, and that if you completely fall apart, uh, as a performer, and you just can't execute what you're trying to do, there's no one that's going to be laughing. There's no one that's going to be thinking badly of you. That everyone who I've invited into this, we're all people who fail all the time. And then I would oftentimes just tell people like, look, I love failing. I don't like the pain of it and I don't like being embarrassed, but some of my best work is built on the back of just failing again and again and again, and then having the aha moment out of the failure that this this is the idea I've been looking for. This is the posture that I've been hoping for. I'm not afraid anymore, and I can move forward. So take that for me, and then apply it to your two categories, and then I'll see if I can riff on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go into my pretense protection, but I'm really provoked. I think you've given us a real gift here, Charlie. Like, as I'm thinking about your sensitivity to fear, you can smell when fear has entered the room.
Yeah, which is the protection part for sure.
Yeah, but there's two kinds of leaders. There's the leaders that wield fear, and there's leaders that want to diffuse fear because perfect love casts out fear. Can we just stay on that for a bit? What would be a sign that you're looking for in an artist when you're like, I think she's gripped by fear or he's gripped by fear? What might that look like? I know it'd be 100 things, but what would be one or two?
Yeah, some signs would be, just sort of classic self-doubt being voiced too much, which to me is a signal that, uh, you know, I'm saying this a lot because I really want to be taken seriously. I don't really, I mean, I don't know if I can hit that note. And so you might say, well, just give it a try, and then the immediate reply is like, I just don't know. I just feel like it's going to sound stupid. It's like, well, why don't you give it a try? You know? And so you go through this give and take process of, and then as soon as, if the person is willing to give it a try, so to speak, and if they get inside what perhaps my goal is for them or their goal for themselves, right? Then I can praise them. I can say, "Oh my gosh, you know, you you got right inside of it. I mean, it's not the thing yet, right? But we're so close. So now we have a starting place that we can begin to work on this, right?" And so if I can get them to that place, like for example, there's a trick where people have problems singing different syllable sounds. So they may sing a or, like they have to hit something that has an or, like let's say it's sure, and the sh part of the sound, the way you form sh, and it could be different. Like you might form sh different, right? Than someone who was raised in the States would. So, but I key in on that, right? So it's the sh of sure, or the s of sure, that is causing them to hit the note flat, right? So I'll say, you know what? Sing it one more time this time, and then while you're singing the lyric, instead of saying sure, say tour or doer. And so they'll sing like, I wasn't dour about you. And then they hear it in tune because they've gotten rid of this tiny little obstacle that is causing them to sing it out of tune. And then I'll be like, did you hear that? Did you hear the difference? And they're like, yes, that's amazing. I said, okay, now now sing it sure, right now, while it's still in your head, right? And then they'll sing it and it'll be in tune. And then now their confidence is built up, right? So you go, I mean, think of that, like that could all be happening like in 3 minutes, right? And you're taking someone through, they're completely convinced that they can't do something. They're down on themselves. They're maybe a little bit embarrassed. They couldn't hit the note. You've taken them all the way through that to the point where they're hitting the note, and now you're praising them, and they're smiling, and they're happy with themselves. And that's just, yeah, the idea of like overcoming obstacles in capturing performances, where we're archiving things. Of course, everyone's trying to do their best when you're going to see a live concert. But when you're archiving and you're just under the microscope, you literally hear and see things that you would never hear and see in a concert setting. And part of that is just the clarity with which we listen, in the same way that, you wouldn't want to go to someone's, backyard shack to have surgery. you know, it's the same way with recording great music. We have amazing gear. We have amazing ability to listen and hear acutely. And so that can be a challenge sometimes because people are really, wow, that's the way I really sound. Yeah, that's the way you really sound. And I love it. And they might be like, oh gosh, it sounds so bad. It's like that thing in my throat and all that. And you have to either say like, yeah, we got to work on that. We got to fix that. So maybe we won't record today. Let me send you over to Vanderbilt, see this doctor. Let's see if we can get that phlegm out of your throat. Or you say, no, that's a feature. you know, I love that about your voice. Who told you that wasn't good? And then we talk about that. And they may buy into it, they may not. There's nothing false about any of it. It's just like I would never say to someone, oh, that's a cool sound if it wasn't a cool sound. I mean, if I'm sold on it, then I want to sell it to them. I want to help them see that, like, wow, that's fantastic. That's what makes you unique. Um, but again, there can be that the protection part. I've seen that so much, where people get their guard up. Um, and then to me, it's just like I have to find out what are you protecting? You know, are you protecting a story that is a long running narrative? Are you protecting an incident with the last producer you worked with? I mean, I have to work on that. It may take days, before I get to the bottom of where this protection is coming from. Because ultimately, I literally want people to just be so much in the moment and so playful that if they make a mistake, they just laugh, you know? Or we get to the point where we're so comfortable with each other that we all laugh. It's like, aren't we just all ridiculous? Yeah, it's great. All right, let's do it again. uh, but it, but not everybody wants that. I mean, it is some people are pretty tough nuts to crack.
I think the universal, as I'm listening to your moves that you make as a producer, you've actually given us some really universal gifts for any human relationship because you practice a hypersensitivity to the craft, whatever our vocation is, the way you chase it all the way down to the depths with a breath at the same time. You're also hypersensitive to fear. I think any of us, Charlie, can learn to read fear in another person and over time can learn to disarm that fear. You're also building stepping stones for people. Like, as I'm listening to you, you didn't say this overtly, but you're almost measuring as you give them feedback, you're measuring, is it a step too far? Do I need to put a smaller stone? Hey, go to
Mm-hmm.
Vanderbilt. Like take the day. We don't have to sing today. Like you're actually building a path. And then if they're not able to walk it, you're coming back down the path and adding steps.
Exactly.
This
Yeah.
is a real gift, I think, to any human that wants to help another human thrive.
Yes.
um, I have some regret. We have to move into the final part of
Yeah.
the show. We
Yeah.
could have camped there for quite a while, but
Mm-hmm.
um, we have run up against the gauntlet of anxiety questions. Charlie, let me put it to you
Oh
this way:
no. Oh no.
you've won 6
But
Grammys.
mm-hmm.
You've been told by the Reverend Al Green
Yeah.
that he's not going to sing anymore. If you want that take again, you have to sing it yourself. He's leaving.
That's
Uh,
right.
you've gently coached Jackson Brown in some backing vocal
Mm-hmm.
work. However, you
Yeah.
have not yet endured the 2025 Being Human Gauntlet. So, without further ado,
No,
we'll
I don't
do.
know what to accept. I don't know whether I'm going to start to get protective or not here.
Yes, fortunately, you are in the hands of a person that likes to disarm fear. So, I think
Yes.
we'll be okay. These are, unfortunately,
You've got some bona fides, huh?
yeah, we asked to do these in rapid fire, but I'll do 4 questions. Here's the first one.
Remind me again, like rapid fire, are we talking one sentence, two sentences?
Yeah, like less than a paragraph or less. You don't have to come up with pithy, playful lyrics, but a paragraph or less is probably the goal.
Do you want these to rhyme?
That would be remarkable.
Okay. I'll see if I can channel my mom here.
How do how do we do here? Question number 1. What's one way that you treat other people? If you started treating yourself the same way, your life would be better.
The first thing that comes to mind is um, doing sort of like what we were just talking about, like giving people um, the space to not have something figured out, and maybe they need a day off. You know, it's like just take a day off. We don't need to do this today. You know, that's something that at 68 years of age, I'm just learning to give myself that. You know, so I would say I'm right in the middle of you know, talking to myself. You know, my self-talk is it's right in that zone.
Okay. Second question. Where do you experience a gap between what you believe about God versus what you experience from God?
Gosh, these are so hard to find the short answer to such great questions. I would say that you know I definitely hold to the idea that God is intimately in all our endeavors and the world that we're making as we cooperate with Him. And I would say the only gap for me is just I am mystified. Um, I've read the Old Testament. I've read. I know what the psalmist says and what Proverbs say about the evil man and the greedy, and this too shall pass. You know, and leave all this up to to God, and God will sort it out. You know, and I just find myself being impatient with the sorting out. Um, at the same time, living with the tension that I still want the patience, to sort it out, but there's just things that seem so overwhelming at times in the world that I just, oh God, really? You're not just sorting this out, you know? I know you're doing all of these sort of micro sortings. I mean, I know all these people that are involved in doing these things that contribute good to this issue that I'm, got my compass pointed towards. But overall, I remain a little bit baffled about your timing.
Hmm. Yeah. When the church is at its best, what is one thing it offers you can't get anywhere else?
Absolute unconditional love and um, intimacy and support, like literally the giving away of oneself and all that you have.
Okay. Final question, Charlie. When in your life lately have you felt most fully and completely loved?
Yesterday. Yeah, just yesterday. I had a wonderful, first day to my book launch that I was surrounded by my children, by Andy and children and old friends and my grandchildren. And everyone was working together and putting together the day and then the after party. And um, yeah, I mean, I don't know how one person could feel any more loved than that. I mean, I had a room filled with people who came to support me. And, um, I mean, I had people fly from Canada to, to Nashville, drive from Atlanta. Uh, had a retired pastor come up to me. He was teary eyed and he didn't want a signature. He just wanted to said something really profound to me. He just said, "You've always been with me." And I was just it choked me up because I was like, for another human being to say that to someone, who's a stranger, really. I mean, they're saying you're not a stranger, number one. They're saying you've always been with me. I mean, that's at the level of trust and intimacy that we reserve for, our spouses and our children and really our relationship with God. And so there was something kind of just so beautifully divine about that moment in what he was saying is just like wherever I've gone, I'm a retired pastor now, but wherever I've gone, like you've been the soundtrack and you've been something that has always been steady, and I always knew that I could look to you um, for a whole range of things. It could have just been something I'd written that was theologically oriented, or it could have been a song. But he explained this, in 30 seconds, and it just overwhelmed me. The love of it was astonishing, and when that happens to me, I then say, "Thank you, God." It's like you can't not praise. You can't not worship. You can't not point to the source of this extraordinary thing that's happening. And again, that's what the church does, It does things like that.
Hmm. Mm. My guest has been Charlie Peacock. His latest book, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music. It's out right now. You can get it right now. I am obviously, for my audience, I'm a music aficionado. Music has been such a profound part of my life. And as you have heard from me before, and even through this interview, I think my deep fandom of Charlie's music is also on record. Charlie, like that retired pastor. I think for me, I moved countries when I was 20 and didn't know a soul, went to a college, didn't know a soul. And music has always been a healing part of my life. But in that homesick period, it was huge for me. And you were one of the artists that, like that retired pastor, I feel like, man, I've always had Charlie Peacock music in my life. For people who are less familiar with Charlie, maybe less of a music nerd than I am, the reason to read this book is because Charlie shows us how vocation works, how place and your own story and your pain and relationships all work together for you to put your work out into the world. I'll also say, as we wrap up, 2025 is a doozy of a year. We have, is those of us in North America, a very combative situation we're in right now. Last year, Charlie and his wife came out with an amazing book, Why Everything That Doesn't Matter Matters So Much, The Way of Love in a World of Hurt. It's about as timely a book as you would want nowadays. And when you hear that Charlie is 68, you might be saying to yourself, I wonder if he's still releasing music. Oh, yeah. Charlie's latest album, Every Kind of Uh-Oh, is amazing. I have
Thank
it
you,
on
Steve.
vinyl. I love it. You can grab it wherever you grab your music. Charlie, this has been a genuine delight. I was looking forward to it. It was better than I'd hoped. Thank you for coming on Being Human.
Well, I just love what you do, Steve. So, I'm just going to be a fanboy and tell you I love you and I'm grateful for you.
Love you too. Thank you so much.